Yeah, I just do legal stuff. Yeah, it was,
When you don't know.
when I have questions, I call them. But, you know, I wanted to make sure.
Yes. Airport.
I think our committee, they might, that's right. You know, there's not enough of us down, there's not enough stupid guys down here for them to talk there, but I mean, that would make it together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would. Think that might
You know what? We found out about what, 9 years ago.
After 10 years of working with them. Better not, now we went to high school together.
Graduate class at 1985.
So now there's somebody.
What did you were in the class?
Right. Think of college. No, he is, he lives, he's a nice guy. He's got a small condo, a couple $100,000 deal. So I was just trying to, Todd, small, but he's not here right now. But, about whether it's even worth doing the 1031. I don't know what, I don't know how he bought it, I don't know what it. Capital gains will be.
Yeah, I mean.
It may be, or maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah, he's talking about whenever.
round up your message.
Go ahead. You know, doing good. She's
I'm interested here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I had a meeting with who was going. Oh, I can't work either.
Information out here.
Yeah.
Photographs and photographs or. Small aspects.
Donuts out here, if you want any. There's some donuts out there. Where are you back?
I didn't see you come in.
No, but I mean, where are you back there?
I came in the back door.
Oh, okay, well, you can sit back there.
Yeah, I'm not sit back. I see you all the time.
Come on.
That way,
No.
when you sit up in front, you get picked on.
You two need to settle.
I know, right? All right, 10 o'clock.
I was.
Come on, broker, let's get this thing
Started
started.
over here.
Well, we're supposed to socialize 15 minutes prior to this.
She gets a meeting, because you know I'm not.
Oh, you were.
Very springy,
Easter eggs.
I was gonna say that.
Thought I get rest today since I have to.
You're very bright today.
You need your sunshine.
Almost.
The Guardians are out here.
Like
The Reds are doing their typical. Mid-season, mid-season season
But I don't.
flop. Drop like 8 hours. Cards will be.
Hot, you know, you can drag them up.
Card.
That's why we go.
Seems like, yeah. Well,
my head.
go through a lot of high profile players.
You got questions? You got my questions?
Super.
More language, yeah, more language. I don't even know this topic.
Who's that?
That's it, 20 people.
The big deal. It's not, was originally from there or just?
No. This is like, it's like he's gonna just.
You're the bad man, you're right.
It's just now for this guy, and that notion of me, why go in market?
You got a lot of questions?
Like,
It's got a lot of notes.
Yeah.
condition that you get an okay. No, that's the world. You know, that's.
That's so.
Did you just finish it?
True, but yeah, I mean.
And I agree with things like that, so then this.
Yeah, you gotta work through it once.
Yes.
I.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did, is that.
There's a lot more.
It's so good.
Yeah,
To
exactly.
me, that was.
That's, I felt the same way with one, so.
I knew.
Sweet tooth Sabrina.
Yeah.
I call it that.
Blur.
Yeah. So then the sweetening was.
Yeah, we're at the next week, big back then, oh,
I
I'm here.
actually.
And Sabrina's coming.
That's Sabrina's coming in.
Mark, who, oh, signed up, they look called so many people RSVP.
And then, you know, finally.
You know,
okay, we're back on,
Sabrina, can you?
FBI, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, she did my size.
Or now.
I have over it, you have to know and check it. And I.
Right.
Like things anyway.
I don't have it. I don't know. No, but I thought.
You need one? Do that stuff.
Well, this is your opportunity to ask a lot of questions. We have Northwest Tile, we have almost a whole office here.
Yeah.
Full leadership team here. Bill Fergus is part of Northwest Law and legal counsel over at Northwest Tile. Are you with Northwest or are you separate with the law? I don't know.
I'm kind of.
You can talk to us a little bit about your bio. We can do that.
General counsel,
We've got-
title agency, Department of Law.
Yeah. We got Brad and Greg, they're part of they're a different part of the Northwest Tile. They also work on the commercial side of Tile. And then you have Kathy, who's the face of town, been with us for 20-some years, it seems.
26.
26 years, so we've been around 21, so.
So, yeah, you guys.
But I've been with you that long. Ever since I got licensed, I started with Northwest Tile. But this is your opportunity to ask questions. You know, this is our, you know, there's a lot of things going on. I've got a couple questions we could start with, or if you want to talk about some of the legal things you've been seeing.
Well, I think the big elephant, the elephant in the room is the Burnett case, of course. And Burnett versus NAR, and NAR lost big time. So genesis of the case, first of all, okay, cooperative compensation and clear cooperation are the key elements here. So as long as you've been practicing, and as long as my wife's been practicing, and I think as long as everybody in this room has been practicing, we have had cooperative compensation, which basically said that as a listing agent, you have to offer compensation to buyer's agents, even if it's $1. Okay, and that was the rule that's been the rule for a very long time, and without legal challenge, really. What hopped it all up though was clear cooperation. Okay, so under cooperative compensation, you could conceivably market your property outside. Even if you were a member of the MLS, you could market your property outside the MLS and not offer compensation. That's the theory. Okay, hence no antitrust violation. All right. Along comes all the problems that we had in the seller's market with coming soon, and that sort of thing, where people were pocket listings, right? And the solution to pocket listings was clear cooperation. Where, you know, if you're gonna list the property, you know, you must list, right, and you must put it on MLS. That one was the trigger. Okay, because now you have now you put those two together, and some bright lawyers figured out that was an antitrust violation. And they must have, I'm willing to bet they filed a lawsuit within days after that came out. And the lawsuit wound its way through the court for a few years. We've probably all heard by now that the jury came back in under 3 hours on a complex antitrust case, which means they really didn't like somebody, right? Typically. So rumor has it's
Probably didn't run through.
rumor has it was Gary Keller, but what's that?
So they probably didn't analyze all of the legal tidbits in 3 hours.
No, it's So, that's how we got to where we are, okay? You know, hundreds of millions of dollars in settlement money later, we have a preliminary settlement. Now, the preliminary settlement is just that, it is a preliminary settlement. It has not been fully approved by the court. The general terms of the settlement are related to the MLS, okay? So specifically, under the settlement, in the MLS, a seller cannot offer compensation to a buyer's agent. Elsewhere, yeah, but not in the MLS. Now, the Justice Department has stuck their nose into the whole thing, and they are pushing for a broader prohibition than that. So that's where we're at right now. The NAR has determined that as of August 17th, they're going to implement the terms of the preliminary agreement anyway. Right?
August 17th, yeah.
You have forms that have been produced now, one by the, I was talking to Jill about this morning, actually. One by Columbus Realtors, that apparently, I know she's not particularly fond of it because it goes through the entire, you know, it has a paragraph on the whole thing about, the requirement for the buyer to compensate, right? And that to be set forth in your buyer broker agreements, right? So you know this by now. You're all gonna have that buyer broker agreements
Before you show your first house.
before you show your first house. Now you got two things to do for your first house. Make sure they got funding, right? And get that agreement signed. But your broker will probably review that form, right? And you'll do what you're gonna do with it. You're gonna give your agents whatever you think is a proper form. Mark, you can weigh in on that.
The couple questions we've had over the past couple of weeks was, you know, a listing agent may or may not compensate. And if they are, you're gonna have an agreement between you and the listing agent. Or it might be negotiated in the contract itself, but so when we get to closing, what does the title company look for? So if it's in the contract, it says this broker will get compensated that much, and then of course, the other listing agent will tell you how much they're going to get compensated. That's an easy understanding on how you prepare your settlement statement.
Right.
So if it's what do you need from us as agents representing buyers when we have an agreement outside of the purchase contract that says that the buyer will pay the brokerage directly the compensation factor, or
It's going to look a lot.
do we bring you a statement that where you have a credit or a debit on the buying side closing statement? In the old, and then the way it is right now, sellers pay the compensation, so you have a credit on the compensating on the seller side. So now you're gonna have On both sides?
Well, it's gonna be on both sides, yeah, and really,
Do you need to see the buyer's agency agreement?
no more than we need to see the listing agreement.
All you need to say, we're getting paid this much.
This is how much you're getting paid. And, you know, the buyer is gonna sign a settlement statement. The settlement statement says, you agree.
At the end of the day, we're a neutral intermediary that needs joint instruction from the parties. So we have the invoice from the agent that's saying this is what I'm owed, and the parties are confirming that through their authorization. That's enough for us to rely on the joint instruction. Where we've had issues in the past is an agent will have sort of an email to us that says, hey, I'm owed 4%. And then the party saying, well, I said it's going to be 3%, and that's basically something that needs to be reconciled. So the documentation is really to make sure that there's clear instructions between parties before even reaching.
Yeah, this isn't really, and realize this is- what we're not talking about here is necessarily between the parties. It's between the buyer and the buyer's broker, because seller doesn't care.
Well, to some degree, it does now involve the seller, though, if the listing agent is deciding how much the seller is willing to pay.
Right, what Mark's talking about here though is, let's say we're going in there's no agreement for compensation from the listing agent, right?
Yeah.
Or even give you a more complicated one, listing agent says, there's an agreement in the contract, right, that says that the seller agrees to pay 1%. But the buyer broker is getting a total of 3%. Right? And so you get that 1% is gonna come off that's by agreement of the parties, right? Because that's in the contract. But the other part is strictly between the buyer's agent or buyer broker and the buyer. So it really has nothing to do with it.
Well, and some of the things we're seeing on the commercial side is, who here does commercial? How many people know that was commercial? Alright, well, just generally speaking, I've seen listing agreements on that side. Have general brokerage fees of what's owed by the seller, and then they're almost having a standalone document related to what rights there are to offer a buyer's agent a certain percentage. And what I think is just worth being mindful about is if you're capping that in any way, or if it's unclear, at least the experience I saw, the sellers were hesitant to even sign a listing agreement because they were like, well, is there a chance I'm paying 9% here? Because I have 6 that's going to the listing agent under this agreement, then this separate agreement that relates to the buyer's agent, not to exceed 3% for the buyer's agent, where I think in practice, a lot of times that's perceived to be, 3% coming out of the overall 6%, but some certain investors, certain people that their ears are up and they're really like perked up on these situations to make sure that they're not gonna get caught essentially paying 7% or 8% or some higher amount in order to appease the buyers.
But in the residential world, it's kind of it's a simpler matter. Really. Yeah.
So I have a question. So you're filling out the buyer agreement and you put in the commission that you're expecting from the buyer, which it says in part can be fulfilled by the seller. Then there's a space where it says other. Are you allowed to put in there, like if you agreed with your buyer that you're gonna take 3%, can you put in the other or if offered by seller, whatever seller is offering?
Or if offered by seller, whatever, so.
You have that. Where are you talking about in the contract?
Yeah, so if I say, let's say I say 1% I'm gonna take from my buyer, but the seller, now I'm coming across a deal where the seller has 3% commission. I'm not allowed to take that 3%, I'm only allowed to take the 1%. Can you address that in the other section? If seller offers higher, or do I have to rewrite?
From what I heard, and I probably need to validate this deeper, is that if I have an agreement with a buyer for 1 and the seller's offering 3, I need to go back to my buyer and amend my agreement so that the 3 can be paid. If you don't amend your agreement, your buyer's.
And really what he's talking about is kind of a self-amending agreement.
Right.
So what he's saying is like, where it is, like, you had, it's like 3%, but in the other part, he's saying like, we had talked about or a commission compensation not paid by, or an agreed agreed fee compensation not paid by seller. So
That's not what
they're the other.
I'm talking about, if I sit down with a buyer and the buyer agrees to pay me 1%. Then I come across a deal where the seller, can I put in that other, okay, buyer 1%? Or in other, if seller offers greater than 1%, I can accept that.
You have to be specific.
Mhm.
You can't leave an open door.
Okay.
So if you and I have an agreement, you're gonna pay me more. And I find out that I have an opportunity to agree, I'm gonna come back to you and say, I'd like to amend our buyer's agency agreement because we do know that the seller will compensate us the standard brokerage fee, whatever your story, whatever your sales is on that. So I have to go back and amend my buyer's agency agreement.
Right, I'm just asking you if we can have it pre-amend, like in that others, what's the other section for in the contract?
The other section is, let's say I don't wanna pay you a percentage, I wanna pay you.
A flat fee.
Flat fee.
Well, it says in the
I'm gonna
top
give
line,
you-
it already says percentage or flat fee. So the other is different section, so I'm
You
kind
said
of.
like builder bonuses, stuff like
Pardon me?
that, builder bonuses, things like
It could
that.
be a builder bonus, and other would be if you are working with someone who is working in the building industry, the new home industry. Some builders will offer a bonus to unload some of their spec homes, I mean, they're hard to come by now, but. In the past, there have been builder bonuses to move their inventory. So if you are, then you might just randomly say, a builder might offer us a bonus of $5,000. I'm willing to take everything. If it goes up to 10,000, then I can only take 5, or you go back and you amend that. So there's so many moving parts in this, buyer side of our agreement.
One of the moving amongst the moving parts are, A, the agreement's not final. B, we don't know how that kind of contract is going to be interpreted by the Division of Real Estate. Because there's companion legislation moving through that's sponsored by the Ohio Realtors, amongst others, that is going to codify the requirement for buyer broker agreements.
We still don't, I don't even know if the division's gonna make that a part of them. Like the mandated documents you need in the contract.
Well, again,
I don't even know who's supervising all of this.
the legislature is looking at legislation that will mandate buyer broker agreements.
What, I think they passed, it's in the Senate right now, about ready to be signed by the governor.
Yeah, so it's close, yeah.
Yeah. And
And that, how the division interprets that.
so, yeah, I don't know who's the police in this one.
The division's the cops on this one.
Okay.
So the division.
So is it safe to assume we can put something in there and ask for forgiveness later?
I suspect.
It's brand new.
I mean, first of all, I got your broker, I'm not gonna contradict your broker. Okay.
I mean, you have the right to contradict me because you have a law degree and I have been blessed to interpret the law.
Yeah, but I play a lawyer on TV, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can contradict me. I don't mind if I'm wrong because you want to sound the right path.
If you come up with that sort of self-executing amendment, right? That's sitting in the contract it's kind of self-executing, automatically amends the agreement if something's being offered. Even if the division were to come back and say, no, that's not legal, my guess is they're not exactly gonna throw you out of the profession. Yes.
To me, I think it would almost be better to talk to your buying client and say, let's go with 3. If they offer 2, I'm willing to work with you.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, I'll take 1 and then I have to come back in a minute.
Yes.
I'd rather go high and be low and go low and come back and figure out how I
Well,
got
the
it.
bottom line too is, if you don't prove your worth, you're not gonna stay in business.
And the other thing is, I don't know how, every closing, we have about 1,500 closings a year here. I don't know how we're gonna look at buyer's agency agreement and make sure that whatever's in the buyer's agency agreement is in the settlement statement.
Correct.
Yeah,
And who is gonna tell the buyer that, oh, by the way, I just got more than you told me you would pay?
yeah.
I
I mean, that's right.
not until somebody sues somebody.
Oh, and it will happen multiple
Yeah.
times, just like I knew that coming soon with COD lawsuits too,
Yeah.
so. You know, my biggest thing is I'm not an attorney.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you say you're gonna get one. And the seller offers you three and you take three and you don't tell your buyer, and the buyer gets mad and sues. You're the one that's gonna be in trouble. You're gonna be one that violated the terms and conditions of the contract. And not the broker, I mean, the broker will be involved, you know, we always have to get involved in this.
So the contract itself is our first form of escrow instructions. When you think of it that
Yes.
way, if you can make sure your contract matches the broker agreement at the front end. Then it is on, the onus is on the title company to make sure that the settlement statement reflects what's in the contract. So like, I think a lot of people glossed over the percentage breakdown to the agents involved in the contract, but it's in there for a reason. That if you make that as a standard practice in how you're filling out your contracts, that will indicate to the parties, to the title company, everybody should be uniform from that point forward. Yeah.
Well, one thing about the discussion, most of the discussion I've heard so far, and I guess rightly so, has been from buyer's agent about how are we gonna get paid 3%. But you know, there is another aspect to this where buyer's agents could help themselves and their buyers. You know, let's suppose you're the one, you've agreed to work for 1%. But when you make the offer, you could say, why don't we ask the seller for a concession that could be used for realtor compensation, closing costs, or down payment. And if you're able to successfully negotiate that, you've not only paid yourself, you've helped your buyers. You think those buyers are not going to go out and tell people, look what happened here. I got help by this realtor. He was able to cover these fees for me, or 2%, if you're at 2% or whatever it is, there is a win-win. And I think part of this negotiating, it's important to keep that in mind, that we're working for buyers and we're working for sellers. We're not just working for our bottom line to get paid. I like to get paid, everybody likes to get paid, but there's another aspect.
There's one aspect to it though, okay? Let's say you have a buyer broker agreement where you're gonna get paid 2%. You cannot negotiate for 3 at that point.
Right, but you can negotiate for money that your buyer, because if the concession's to the buyer, then they're gonna decide how that money is spent. And let's say that they say, we're gonna do 3%. Well, you're owed 1. What do they get? What can they do with the other 2? They can do the down payment, closing costs, whatever they want to do. And that's a pretty attractive package.
My point though is that if you say 1,
You get one.
you get 1, unless they have offered that, unless they have offered.
No,
that
I'm not,
upfront.
yes, I'm not even talking about trying to increase your commission. The other thing to keep in mind that I hear from, because I'm primarily a seller's agent, but I represented buyers before. The other thing I hear from buyer's agents right now is, well, gosh, you know, they can't pay me 3% and pay closing costs and pay down payment. They don't have that much money. Well, you can do something about that through good negotiating.
Oh, yeah, well, that's gonna have to happen actually, because they don't have that money up front.
Right, and so through good negotiation, you could accomplish these things.
Well, that comes from the lender industry. The lending industry, you need to know how do you negotiate closing costs and lender fees and that. You really don't even have a good number unless you've had a conversation with the buyer's mortgage lender, right? And I mean, Bill, you've given multiple examples of how 2-1 buy. Why do a price reduction? Why don't we give the guy full price? Let's do a 2-1 buy down. You know, and that's your off the price, lowers the mortgage payment, and you know, the buyer would have got, or the seller would have gotten the difference anyway. You know, in negotiation.
I think 2 things. One, Kevin, just for clarification, so a contribution cannot be used for down. So, but it can be used for closing costs, prepaid or realtor.
Right.
So just.
Or home warranties,
Or, yeah,
or
anything
insurance.
except down payment. Down payment has to be borrower provided. But the other thing, and Mark and I have had extensive conversations about this, is you guys are going to communicate more with your lenders than you ever have before. For example, you know, I've given this in a couple of the other classes that Mark and Dale have put on. You know, you have a buyer and agency agreement that says you're getting paid 3%. but the seller's only offering 2. The buyer is a first-time home buyer who doesn't have an extra, let's just say it's a $350,000 house, an extra $350 or $3,500 to pay you. Well, if the lender had originally pre-approved them at 5% down, then they could go back and maybe reduce that to a 3% down conventional loan. Get the extra 2% to pay you and some of the closing costs. Yes, it's gonna impact the buyer a little bit because their mortgage insurance is gonna change a little bit, perhaps their rate depending on their credit score. But there are a lot of strategies, and I think I've heard a lot of almost panic. And I understand it because in 2009, when Dodd-Frank came out, many of us lenders thought we were all gonna go out of business too. First, it didn't happen. It did have to change conversations. Teresa mentioned showing value. I think that's gonna be extremely, extremely important. But you're already using strategies to help some of these same buyers that can't afford to pay you. Like buyers that need help. I mean, I have a contract that over the weekend, they needed $9,000 in seller contribution. It was nearly 3% of the purchase price because they had saved just enough for down payment. They had nothing for inspections, appraisal, closing costs, title fees. And it was successful, right? They offered $9,000 more than list price. The seller still netted the same asking price that they had agreed with their listing agent. And ironically, the house appraised for $20,000 over that. Now, that's not always gonna happen, right? Sometimes appraisal could be a constriction. But I really just think you guys have been doing a lot of this for 10 to 15 years. You've just been negotiating for something different than your fee. And now, if you were good at negotiating closing costs for a seller, you should be hella good at negotiating your own fees. I think it's great communication with your lender, your borrower, strategy. I've had my own daughter, we were talking about this and I gave this as an example. You're gonna have buyers that tell you, I don't wanna see that home if they're not gonna help me pay my fee. My daughter asked that question, do I have to go see a home where a seller is not gonna compensate my agent? Because she had signed, she's in Northern Kentucky with the KW agent, she had signed an agreement for 3%. She technically had it, but it would have cleaned her out.
It's gonna happen a lot.
Make sure you get that in writing.
But that also falls back to listing agents knowing your market.
Yeah.
If you know your market is a first-time home buyer or someone
You're gonna
typically,
need-
you better be able to sell it to the seller that you're gonna have to buyers aren't gonna pay, first-time home buyers will not take commission. So you
Teresa-
better be prepared.
Teresa, that's a great point, and that's the other big example. Jeff and I were just talking about this yesterday. You don't see, Ford and Chevy sell tons of cars, right? Ferrari only sells maybe 50,000 cars a year. The reason is Ford and Chevy never would bring out a product that 70% of the potential buyers couldn't afford to pay. And right now, statistics show us that almost 70% of buyers in the market are millennials and Gen Z, which are scraping by together. The reason we're not getting folks trading up is those 30% of the buyers that are sitting on 2 and 3% mortgages aren't moving, guys.
Nope.
So if you're doing a listing presentation,
I'm not moving. Why? Because I'm 2.25%. I do.
but if you're doing a listing presentation and the seller says, I don't want to pay,
Right.
you got to be able to explain, you've just eliminated 70% of your buyer pool. We're not going to get top dollar for this home because we're going to have very few people that can afford to come
Right.
and pay for this home, pay for their down payment, closing costs, and compensate a buyer's agent, $12,000. So I think it's gonna be a transition and there will be, I told Daly yesterday, I think that the best thing that can happen is this starts. And then we all get back together and talk about some successes and failures. Cause there's gonna be you step in the poop and it doesn't work out. And there's gonna be other agents that say, hey, I just had this and this is how we solved it. And you guys
Right.
kind of brainstorm, get your scripts together. I know some people hate scripts, but Jeff and I talked about this. If you're practicing on your clients, that's a risky thing. It'd be better for us to do this.
I think that this whole thing's gonna wash out because sellers are gonna try to give away nothing in commission and
Right.
sit on their homes because there's nobody gonna be able to buy them. And then they're gonna realize that they have to offer something or the buyers can't see them.
No, and like you said, though, there are ways around it.
There's
So,
plenty of ways around it.
Look
They can do a new deal.
we have to figure out.
If you have a buyer that can't afford it, then they can't afford the cash up front. You just have to structure the deal rightly.
Well, that's much.
The 350 just became 350, in your example just became 350, 3,500, and $3,500 of that is coming back as a closing cost credit.
But it's also about affordability. If the sellers, if a buyer right now is paying $550 for a house with no commission. And they have to pay you 3%, it's all about, they're gonna look at their net where they never have before. We've never experienced buyer, it's all about payments. Well, they're not gonna look at payments anymore, they're gonna look at, what is this costing me to get into this house?
Well, okay, so again, in your example, let's say, we're after August 17, there's no offer of compensation sitting there. You got a 3% buyer broker agreement. It's a $550,000 house. You're going to negotiate for my math, roughly $565,000 and $15,000 in prepays. Yeah, is that going to be is that going to make for a higher mortgage payment? Yeah, is it going to be a lot higher? Not really.
Right.
And I think it
And then you got hope like hell it raises.
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna be realistic.
Yeah, I think.
Not in our market, because I already see these prices dropping. I've seen houses in that price range stay on the market longer. I don't think we're already inflating prices because the supply and demand. I don't think we can add on, because I can tell you, I've talked to many appraisers, a lot of lenders, they are cutting down. They are not gonna appraise properties. And then you're gonna have an appraisal cut because you had to raise the price to try to compensate.
We're saying that.
We're seeing it already.
There's already agents cutting buyer broker fees massive in the MLS.
Yeah.
Hopefully you guys are following that, because I've been following that on a daily basis.
A lot of brokers already have zero.
Yeah. They have zero and the houses aren't selling the first
And
weekend.
they're not selling for the same prices. We're watching it.
Yeah, so
Good.
that's what you have to, no, you have to. I mean, I'm
You have
not.
to know that. That's how you educate.
Price reduction, yeah.
Applying
And you know
it right
what?
now.
There's how many people in South. It's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed because you know what? I gotta work with these agents. We have how many agents in our office and they only come here? We have like 15 people here? And this is nationwide. This isn't just Greater Columbus wide. It's a joke. That's why our industry, I'm telling you, that's why our industry, isn't
Tougher
capitalized as professionals.
Let's look at it this
I'm
way,
just
those that
curious
aren't
how
here
the-
probably drop back, get rid of their license, they'll just leave more for you to feed on.
Yeah, no, I'm just talking about this, think about that. I mean,
It's happening.
they're not carrying, I gotta call them on the phone. How are they gonna handle it? I mean, it's gonna be.
Well, it's industry wide, if you can't negotiate your fees.
We've always negotiated our.
We've always negotiated, but as a company, we're, when we look at annually, what our year-to-date numbers look like, year numbers that we have. We don't have 3% commission, the average is about 2.7. So, so when somebody says, the fixed commissions, that, in order to get 2.7, that means people are going down to 1, 2, 3. Whatever, to get the 2.7, so these type of numbers aren't true. But what's gonna happen, I believe, is that, you're talking about, Vince, is that people aren't showing up, learning how to negotiate their terms and conditions, and don't understand how to work with a lender and negotiate maybe more and get less to help the buyer's payment be less. Those people will drop out.
They will.
But what we'll see is those agents, if they just randomly say, oh, okay, you're gonna give me one, no, I'm gonna take one. A company dollar, I've actually, by the end of 2025, our average commission will probably go down to 2.4 from 2.7. Because we're overall, the overall agents have not, we have 300, right? The overall 300 agents are not going to be able to negotiate their terms and conditions. Us here, we will maintain that 3. We'll probably maintain maybe even more. The less people can't negotiate, we might be able to get more.
Right.
So but the top of the pie will always get more money than the bottom. The 80-20 rule, the 90-10 rule. The 10% will always get more than the 90. Always, because they're willing to put forth the energy and education to get there, right?
Yeah. But I also,
I mean, are you guys dying on the vine or what's going on? I mean, I'm not.
So getting back to the original question, this is more of a question for you, Bill, than like a suggestion, but. Is there a way in these broker agreements to say like a minimum of 1% of an amount not to exceed 3%, that they give themselves a range, essentially saying. This is the platform for negotiation, we typically take 3%.
That's price fixing.
Mhm.
I don't think you put that in there. You can't have that in.
Can't have that, that's the whole reason it's the way it is.
Yeah.
Well, I think he's suggesting something close to what you were suggesting about.
Right, but I'm negotiating it and then just putting it in the original buyer agreement.
Right.
It's not fixed in there. It's what I'm just negotiating. I'll take 3%. Let's say I say I'll take 3%, and then in the other I say, or if seller is offering less than 3%, I will accept what seller offers, but no less than 1%. Something, I mean,
I can see that flying.
Are buyers rejecting broker agreements out? Has anybody run into that?
Say that again?
Are buyers actually rejecting agreements if it's below 3%? Like what's the?
I haven't had anybody reject the buyer agreement yet. And
Right,
I get Zillow leads and I do them over the phone and send it to them without ever meeting them and they sign it.
Still,
Conversation.
people are,
It's all in the
with
conversation.
the onslaught of documents. We had a guy call me one time and he went to closing and there was a fee in there that the buyer, the seller had to pay at closing. And the seller called me screaming and yelling, saying, you know, your agent never told me what was in the contract. And I'm not gonna accept this and I'm gonna sue you and, you know, because the seller had to pay whatever these closing costs or some type of fee. And it ends up, the guy was an attorney. And all he was doing is they shove these documents through dot loop, sign here, they sign and move on. They never read the doggone stuff. So are we doing our job and explaining the document to us? Before I send it to you through dot loop to sign, let me explain this to you.
If someone doesn't explain what they're.
Well, the funny thing, he was an attorney and I said, well, if you're an attorney and you didn't read the document and you want to sue us? I go, how well do you think that's gonna go?
Seriously?
Yeah.
That would go well in court.
No, but he called screaming because, you know, he had to pay you an extra $10,000 or something. It's long.
I just think from like a practical standpoint, if people aren't rejecting it at 3%, but then once you have line of sight into what listings are available, but you conceptually know you're willing to accept 1%, it's just easier business developments to, you know, move in their favor.
Again, know your value proposition.
Right.
Yeah.
And it really-
One thing, Mark, is if you have 300 agents now, my guess is in 10 years, you will not have 300
And
agents.
it's, you know,
There's gonna be some people drilled out of this business.
Oh, we will. Because what will happen is the smaller brokerages will start to feel a financial pressure or more financial pressure on these smaller brokers. Because they have the same electric bill we do, but they have 10 agents, you know, like, so what's the
Right,
deal?
I mean, some of your agents, you know, everybody's got a range of agents.
Yeah.
And
No.
the ones who can sell themselves to buyers, not going to.
Did this year.
1%. That's a no.
So I mean, we'll beat a dead horse here on this new buyer's agency representation agreement. I mean, we're working on documentation. The closed board has the exclusive buyer's agency agreement. We'll come up with a non-exclusive agreement for those that don't want to make the love connection. And then we will have also some other specific commission agreements that we will, if for amending stuff too. So we're Bill and I are looking at it. We're gonna have an attorney review it, make sure that we're somewhat compliant with the law. And then
Somewhat.
Somewhat because.
I mean,
Somewhat.
We don't entirely know what the law is.
Well, isn't that.
and the law changes, so they can always change their mind. And so we'll keep you posted. I mean, there's been so much movement over the last month.
Now, we'll be so full of holes, we'll have to do an amendment.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So what about for,
It's like a contract, no form contract, supervised service contract, protect the marketplace.
I was used, I don't know why they said the charter representation.
exclusive?
We'll see if we get that back. Sure.
So sellers, somebody.
So Bill, real quick, so from a legal standpoint,
Or $7.
the last meeting we had, I mean, it's just opened up, you know, back in, I don't wanna say this, I think I go to KW jail on this, but. You know, when we sold sale by owners, we put in our contracts that they had to pay Keller Williams, whatever amount of fee, whatever. Do we not include, if we, cause we're reaching, what it's doing is we're calling the listing agent and saying, is your seller offering compensation? I'll do that before everybody knows. I'll probably do that before I show the house.
Right.
So I know up front, so my buyer knows up front, okay, are we potentially gonna be implementing this? Or are they offering compensation? Are they allowed to disclose to us what the compensation is? That's my question, because no one's answered that for me. Okay,
We don't know.
we don't know. So who implemented to August 17th? We don't even know that.
That's the end of
Well, the other thing that they also say is about this compensation stuff, is that in the event that a seller is not paying compensation, you have to tell the buyer that, by the way, this house is not paying compensation.
Right.
So you're gonna have to do some, I mean, you have to do a whole bunch of extra work. If you got 10 homes to show, you gotta make 10 calls to find out which ones are paying, which ones aren't, how much, what's the difference, because I have to tell you, oh, by the way, this one pays 3, this one pays 2, you owe me 1, this one pays 1, you owe me 2. You know, it's gonna be,
And buyers are gonna pick and choose what house, because they're not gonna wanna make up the difference.
no.
They're not. They'll say, I don't wanna see that house. Or,
And again, this comes down to the fact that, you know, brokerages do not tell you what you need to charge.
Right.
Where you're an independent business contractor, you have the right to charge, you know, percent, you have the right to charge 3%. 2, 1, you have the right to charge 4 or 5, I don't care, whatever it is, your business model. If you can get 4 or 5, you know. Don't
I'm
split
hearing
this good.
something new here, and I want to clarify if I can.
Uh,
Okay, so I haven't talked to anyone about this one yet. So what you're saying essentially is that, let's say you're after August 17th, right? There are no offers of compensation in the MLS. Instead, what you're going to do is, before you show a house, you're gonna get on the phone with the listing agent, and say, is your customer, is your seller offering compensation? If so, how much?
You're gonna have to, it's not an MLS.
Here's another thing, is,
can you do that? Is that what we're doing? Is that what we're supposed to do?
I'm thinking at the moment, I would say yes. Now, month from now, who the hell knows?
Well, right now it's in the MLS.
Right now, it's an MLS watch.
Right, I mean, even like in terms of the future rules, how this thing finally shakes out.
and another thing is that, you know, you're gonna, you're still gonna set your properties up at showing time, and then showing time is gonna notify you that you have a showing. And, you know, the best thing to do is the better relationship you have with another realtor, the more likely you're gonna have a successful transaction. So if you get a showing time request, hey, you know, from 3 or 4, I mean, you might have to be on the proactive. Don't wait for the call. If I got 5 showings on my house, I may have, hey, I just want to let you know we are compensating. I'm gonna call you. You want to see my property, Vince? I'm gonna call you and say, Vince, we are compensating on this, and our particular client is offering 2.5%. On a successful post transaction, meeting the terms and conditions, whatever you want to say. So maybe if I'm getting showing time calls that you're showing my listing, I'm calling you. I'm not gonna wait for you to call me.
Well, that's easy to.
Because here's-
That's easy to overcome that too, because we can do it all.
What's that, Sharon?
I'll just send out a notification.
That's what you send out.
Yeah.
Oh,
But you can't do it through showing.
No,
You can't do it through showing.
But when you do a price reduction, you can send a when I do a price reduction, I can send a notification to all the agents that show the property that we have a price reduction. Why can't I send out a notification that says,
Through showing.
that's not the MLS?
It's a MLS.
Draw the data from
showing. Those that are directly
That
connected.
email's coming directly from me.
Sharon said that was, I know, that's crazy, that's what they said about that.
Anyway.
Makes sense.
I'm gonna do it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's a middle school friend. I'm not great
If you make a phone call to the listing agent and they tell you they're going to be 2.5 hours.
Wait a second here, let me answer that question.
Okay, starting again. So if you do make a phone call to the listing agent to find out what that compensation is, I would and will document it through an email. So it's date and time, and make sure that I have that accordingly filed. So that there isn't a change at the end,
Oh, yeah.
after you've already said, yeah.
The one thing that
But
comes
it
to
would
my mind
still be,
for
it's
some of
still
the
be in the contract.
is you guys are operating in a representative capacity, and that there's certain fiduciary responsibilities in the contract that you're putting in place. So if your call to the other side is perceived as you representing your own interests of whether or not there's a commission, then I think that can become problematic. If it's representative in some way that this determines how the buyer might extend an offer, is another facet altogether. So I guess I would be hesitant to be the one to document and make things first thing before you even show the property, because now are you carrying your own interest rather than the interest of the
They're signing this.
If I can, let me answer that, because it all depends upon the buyer broker agreement. If you got 3% in the buyer broker agreement, you're completely free to go out there to everyone else and say, are you offering compensation? Because now, by definition, you are negotiating for your buyer.
Right.
If you only have one and you're trying to get 3, now you're negotiating for yourself. That's a problem.
Yep.
The other thing you were talking about, like, what I do is like for a listing, if anytime they're showing, I have a text that actually says it might be details about the home or showing where those, I'll actually put that in there. And again, there's my phone, I get a receipt from that. So there is actually a text chain that has, but the person received it. So you can't say, oh, you told me it was 3% and you didn't tell me 2.5%. Like you said, there's a path I can follow on that also too. But again, it's really simple. It changes if it's, hey, good morning, you have a showing schedule for this. Here's some of the information I want to give you. You know, and my plan is to put that. We're offering 3%, you know, and the things that we want to know about the house. Really simple. You know, and then, you know, I'm usually trying to follow up with those agents because I'm also trying to capture all their information. I'm getting every agent's phone number, their email address, I'm putting it in my phone, so when the next deal comes through and I have to see them calling me, I already know who that was. You know, and that's the thing, it's the information we get in, it's what we're doing.
Another thing that was discussed in here, a class yesterday taught by Dayla. Her suggestion was that you schedule the showing, but then you ask your buyer, you know, this, make them aware this seller is offering no compensation. Do you want to complete that showing, and knowing you may not get compensation, and let them say. And then at that point, you provide the information to the listing agent. We're not gonna look at that home because the buyer took it off their list because the seller's not on.
You have that conversation way before you can set up showings. If I'm gonna have a buyer's agency agreement, do you want me to show homes? Or here's my business model, you know, I work so I can eat bread and do all that other fun stuff. But I don't work for free, you know, I don't care how you say it. But so.
I would
just want to let you know
what he said, that the buyer is involved in helping make this decision rather than you unilaterally saying,
But
I'm taking these off the list.
if they offer 0 compensation, are you willing to compensate me the 3%? Or I'm willing to negotiate with you for some type of form if we have a successful deal. So if they say, yes, I'm willing to work with you because I understand your value, then when you find out, then that makes sense. That by the way, this house over here is not offering compensation, so, you know, this will reflect the terms of our offer. So before you even, I mean, you're gonna have that buyer's agency agreement, you have to have that conversation. What do we do if there's no compensation? How do you want to handle? How do you want to compensate me?
That's how.
Because
That's an easy
my
conversation to
compensation
have.
is not 0.
Well, to the point I heard earlier, those communications you're having with your buyer now are equally as important to have in writing, have documentation.
That's right.
So like,
That's
that's always been.
That would go under bond.
Well, that would be under additional terms in the bottom of the buyer.
But you have to remember, when you sign this, it's all in what's common practice is gonna get around. If everybody starts cutting their commission to 1% as a buyer's agent, that's what the industry is gonna bear. So again, it will bear. I know it's not talk, but when buyers say, well, I've been compensated on, you know, I haven't had to pay a commission to my buyer's agent. We all know it's not your
But
client,
here's
but it's
the
gonna,
thing. I don't think they'll get that way.
no.
There's already the 1%.
Oh,
so-
sure.
And there, you know.
There might be people to work for
And
$500.
there's only a few, like maybe less than.
As buyer
this many.
agents or as.
Listing agents,
Listing
the
agents, yeah.
1%ers out there,
Right,
and
Buyers,
there's 10,000 realtors on the board.
right.
So I don't think the 1%er or that one, it may be, but it's not gonna be,
I can't imagine.
Well, I know I'm not.
it's not gonna dominate. our-
Right,
I can't imagine that becoming the norm for buyer brokers.
right, I agree. You can't stay in business.
It's too much work,
Yeah,
Right.
I wouldn't do it for.
too much work.
Well, right now, the buy side of the industry is the most challenging, like, we're talking about prices dropping, different things, but like getting something into a home is
Oh, yeah.
where there's value right now.
Right.
So.
What do you guys do with, when a contract says we want you to hold the earnest money? How do you handle that?
We have an earnest money escrow agreement on, and we're a little different from the commercial side and residential side, so I'll speak to residential. Residential, we hold it under our escrow, under our earnest money escrow agreement, be happy to hold it. It has to be signed before we accept the money, and we hold it under the exact same terms and conditions that you would hold it as a broker. So the whole thing in revised code 4735.24. You know this, Mark.
And we have one being held by Northwest right now.
2 years, you know, the whole thing.
So at the end of 2 years, do you notify the seller that you're gonna release it?
At the end of 2 years, we release it back to the buyer. That's the law. We follow the law that you live under as a broker.
Yeah.
Because the big problem that I've been working with Northwest now for a little over 8 years, okay? And the big problem that we had in our growing pains is that we were holding this money without proper escrow agreements. And, you know, people disagree, they break up the deal, the seller refuses to, you know, both sides refuse to do anything with the earnest money, and it's just sitting in our escrow account. This is not a good thing for us. The state doesn't like that after a while. So, you know, we had to come up with a system where there is a conclusion to the whole thing for us.
Yeah. Well, for all parties.
For all parties, yeah. For us, you know, the buyer and seller are not going to agree, you know, we're imposing an agreement on them. That's all there is to it. That's what the escrow agreement is all about.
That's good. So I think the important part of that conversation is that you, as a title company, have your own escrow agreement that both parties sign. It's just not, I'll take your money
Right.
and fall, you know, so you have an understanding that the terms and conditions of the
And
contract.
they have a similar thing now, you know, in commercial, you're dealing with more sophisticated parties. You're dealing with lawyer drafted contracts for the most part. And so a lot of times they have an emergency agreement that basically says, we'll hold it pursuant to the terms of the contract. That generally, right,
It's a mix, I think.
It's a mix.
We have the same, we use the same agreement that you do for when we can, but a lot of times we send that to the lawyers or to the brokers and they just sort of incorporate it.
Yeah.
As a document, an escrow agreement within the contract.
Or they just cut and paste a paragraph in their contract that mirrors.
We're getting involved early.
Termination of escrow terms.
If anybody's doing commercial work, it is valuable, like even if you're doing a letter of intent, or if you're still in negotiating draft. Like we can help tee that stuff up so that when the contract gets signed, our earnest money form gets signed that same day. Because we won't release our wire instructions until that gets signed, so it's just, there's too much risk in a commercial deal. It preserves our right to interplead funds, so there's all sorts of reasons. We have to navigate it carefully. Similar to the contract, it's the general rules of escrow, like we are a neutral intermediary, we collect documents, we collect funds, we disperse according to the joint instructions of the parties. So if we don't get joint instructions, that's the situation where funds sit, and so we have to carry out what was agreed upon in the original escrow agreement.
And we were talking about one yesterday, it slipped through the cracks.
I don't know,
It's a small amount of money, it's like sitting in forever.
2 years, sellers didn't want to respond to anything. They aren't contesting it, but they're just out there.
Yeah, I think I got a notification today in my calendar. Sometimes it's 2 years. It's like-
Probably not.
So we're here, this is coffee with council. If you have, I know that Burnett is the elephant in the room these days, but are there any other topics of interest? What's
How
about?
important is the type of deed or in the title commitment, maternal warranty deed, or, you know, what should we be aware of on that? Especially if I buy a house and I only have it for a year,
You buy
I'm
it
only gonna offer you,
as a buyer with title insurance.
yeah,
And at least as to the initial deed that comes out of the closing,
yeah,
it doesn't make too much difference to you, because we're ensuring that transition as if you had a general warranty, which is the highest and best, for the highest and best, deed that you can get. Okay, so you can have so like in the Columbus residential contract, it says, shall provide a general warranty deed or a fiduciary deed as appropriate. So, if you have, Joe Smith, who's the successor trustee of the Ralph Jones Trust, okay? Clearly a successor trustee, clearly, most likely an irrevocable trust at that point. That successor trustee is only going to produce a fiduciary deed, which is a whole different set of warranties. All he's warranting on in a fiduciary deed, all you're warranting is that you have the authority to do what you're doing.
yeah.
Very short version. Okay, whereas in a general warranty deed, you're guaranteeing the quality of title forever against all comers.
So if you just have a fiduciary, can I add to that? So that's, I mean, do I need to?
You don't need, if title insurance is being offered, right, so the buyer gets title insurance, even if they're just getting a fiduciary deed, we are insuring the transaction as if they had a general warranty.
Okay.
It's that simple.
The warranties are effectively just like certain legal rights, like marketable title being a key one, quiet enjoyment. So when you're saying a limited warranty, that's just saying for my period of ownership, I'm getting a warranty as it says this.
Yeah, so-
General being for the entire chain of ownership up until the point, right?
So banks, for
There's
example.
no difference there, though. If you're giving a limited deed, is it like?
Again, a limited warranty deed,
difference.
as we said, it can only, let's say a bank, the best example is Bank Rio, right? So in a Bank Rio, the bank will only offer a limited warranty deed. They're saying for the 3 months that we've owned title, right? We will warrant title for those 3 months. Everything before that, go find out for yourself. Which of course, as title agents, we go find out for ourselves. And then we provide title insurance that is the equivalent protection from general warranty.
So if the bank owns the property for 3 months as a limited, and then you say, well, if I'm gonna insure this, I'm gonna do a general. And then in your general,
We're just providing title insurance. We're searching title for the period of marketability.
yeah,
If it was an uninsured transaction,
But
on
what-
a limited warranty deed, your
Yeah.
first recourse would only be for the owner during their period of ownership. If there's a marketability of title issue from a prior owner, you'd have to go to that prior owner, even if it was 40 years ago, to try and assert a claim. What title insurance does, it covers that entire period of ownership, regardless of what type of deed gets transferred. But what we're really insuring is the warranty.
We're insuring more than what a limited warranty provides, so it doesn't really matter if they're buying title insurance. They're going to get.
Yeah, if you're buying title insurance, it doesn't matter what kind of deed you get.
But if an owner wanted to, let's say a new owner wanted to sue the prior owner, if that person granted a general warranty deed, they could technically sue under those warranties. Where a limited warranty, they're limited.
Of course, in a Bank Rio, the owner receiving it is was foreclosed upon, they had a sheriff's deed intervening, so there's nobody to sue.
Right.
Well, nobody to sue. So
And when you-
gotta get title insurance.
And whenever you see a quick claim deed, that's essentially saying we're cutting off any claims of any knowledge about the title. We're just deeding it as is, no representations about anything.
And we probably won't.
You're not even warranting you own the property.
We're typically only using quick claim deeds to knock out a potential claim of interest. We never want to use them as the source of conveyance title. We're using the general warranty deed for.
So if there was a lien in there, would it have to be resolved? Prior to that transfer?
For a quick claim deed.
Yeah.
I mean, typically you're inheriting all the risk. We would make it insure under a warranty deed.
Just curious.
Yeah.
And we only issue for, quick claim deeds to eliminate risks such as, for example, there's a court order for, a divorce for the husband to,
Right.
to convey the wife. Husband will convey by quick claim deed.
But I've seen insurers like Fidelity or one of these major insurers refuse to essentially carry on a claim because there was an intervening quick claim deed in chain of title. But that essentially ended the chain of warranties to the point that they're only taking claim as it relates to what. Now is a unique situation and a lot of factors that go into it, but essentially when you think of a quick claim deed, if it's a conveyance, you're basically cutting off the chain of warranties.
Yeah, that's why you don't want to convey a full interest on quick claim deed. That's not, it's not.
Good question.
Mark, a question for you. So do you see it being a fee structure like commercial in contracts are doing, or are you saying it's gonna end up going into the contract? My thought is I'm gonna make sure that my fee structure is detailed somewhere in the contract, so that all parties know. It's buyer,
Ideally,
seller,
I mean-
and both, and all the agents.
Ideally, that's probably the best way to pass on the contract for the title preparation. Is that they're gonna read it and they're gonna put it in the settlement statement. So ideally. But it's not gonna always be an ideal situation.
But
We're gonna have to, sometimes we might have to send an invoice over or say, hey, by the way, we have an agreement. Now, if you have an agreement outside of the purchase contract, I would create an agreement with you and your client and have them sign it. And then I say, okay, here's the purchase contract, and by the way, here's my agreement with my client for the difference of compensation. So if I'm gonna pay you one and the client says, I'm gonna pay you 3, so here's the 2% difference, I'm gonna prepare maybe a little invoice, send it to him to acknowledge it and accept it, and then I'm gonna send it to them. That way they have all the documentation at the time of closing. So that the your commissions can be sent ACH or wired over so we can get them out. All of it. So instead of just getting one at settlement and then having your client pay you 2% later. Because then, there's all sorts of.
Well, you might have some federal law issues in that.
Yeah. We try and get it all together. That's the best way.
It needs to all be on settlement statement.
We get it on the
Problem.
And that's where,
I don't know, what is that become a taxable event? That if I have to pay you, I'm gonna buy a house and then I'm gonna add a commission dollar on it. Is that somehow an expense?
I'm not quite understanding.
I mean, so if I'm a seller and I sell and I pay, it's my net to seller that I'm gonna be taxed on, right? So you're expensing out a commission.
Yeah.
If a buyer has an additional expense, is that a tax deductible item?
But
On the bottom side, I can't see the buyer's gonna get any tax breaks out of it, because.
I like what you're selling, but no one's buying.
You'll give me, they'll.
If it was, then that's a sell point.
Exactly.
Well, but if you have a seller that says, I don't have the funds to buy this house, but when I sell my house, I'll pay you the buyer's commission, is that legal? I mean, it's, you know, because first of all, you say to your buyer, you know, well, I don't have the money if I, you know, a lot of buyers buy first before they sell. It goes back to, can they pay you for the listing commission? Is that allowed? I mean, I guess you can. It just.
It's getting more
It
confusing.
will. We're gonna have.
I don't know, there's gonna be a fair amount
It's
of
gonna be a lot, it's gonna be a mess.
All right, you start saying
Prepare.
office hours.
Your phone's gonna be, well, same people.
Hey, it's you would die, let's say.
I have a question. Have any of you seen the buyer broker compensation that the higher rooms came out? Okay, in your opinion, then, if this is written down and signed by everyone, and then something in the contract changes, this can be amended? Is that in your opinion?
Is that the same as the one that we got here
Shots.
yesterday?
Yeah, it's
Oh, my God.
from the Higher Association.
Well, if it is,
Is that the same one we got
Yeah.
here?
Yes,
Okay.
maybe you haven't seen that yet. Assume that I haven't seen it yet. Oh, okay, well.
it's fresh
That's
off the press.
later.
Yeah. But if you have disagreement, then
There were questions about at what point did that agreement?
If you have, I thought you had to.
And what I was told, the best thing would be to sign that all right just before closing, so that it doesn't likely change. I would also, an opinion is once the contract is made.
Signing it right before closing,
No.
it's gonna get you in trouble.
no, I would, if I'm gonna do a deal with you.
Yep.
And I'm going to have, I'm gonna identify the buyers. We've come down to a point where we're gonna write an awful on a piece of property, so I'm gonna identify the property. And then in here, I'm gonna put my commission in here because we've already agreed upon it. I'm gonna make it part of the contract.
Right.
And I haven't signed at the same time of the contract, because we've already negotiated it at the time of negotiation.
Okay, so my question is, then let's assume you do that, and then, as usual, you know, the inspections take place, and it's a disaster, and the buyers want some money, and the seller may say, okay, and seller and buyer may agree, I'm gonna pay you this money, but, you know, I'm not
We
gonna
already
pay,
do that.
but I'm not gonna pay that contribution that I promised to pay on the buyer side, that's gonna have to come out of there.
How many of you ever said, I will give up $1,000 of my commission to get this repair done, so we get the doggone thing done?
That's what I'm talking about, as long as.
Well, we already do that, so.
And we need to amend this.
Then you would amend it.
Okay, and it's possible to do that. I guess that's my question. It's possible to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could revise it.
In real estate, anything can. And usually.
Yeah, there's no, there's no form. So you say, where's the form? There is no form. This is the form. I mean, if it's gonna be amended, it's gonna be amended.
When you amend, when you revise, write on that same document, initial it, like what are you, the same exact one, keep the same one running with new initials?
You're gonna need some form of documentation. It
Can
could
just
be
an
this
email
form.
that you attach to it?
What's that?
Can it be an email that you attach to it?
Yeah.
Is written, saying that, you know, that you.
It's something attached to the contract?
No, well, just like to amend that, I'm just trying to figure out, you know, if we have a bunch of different things scratched out, initial,
I think, so I think it's a document,
okay,
Separate document.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so,
okay.
just like you were
okay.
doing it, I don't know that I'd want an email unless it said an email said
Well,
like, we
not
are,
signed.
by this email, I am amending our broker agreements, but.
But then it has to be, the email has to be accepted. You have to, there has to be a response to the email, or they can say it wasn't received, or it wasn't accepted, it wasn't agreed upon.
I'd be a little careful about.
Yeah, that's why everything-
Email, but yeah, you could just, whatever works, if you want to both physically write on the same thing and cross things out, initial them, that's fine, probably, but.
I would recommend a separate.
Yeah.
A new one.
Just so that there's more. Probably said something about superseding.
Yeah, so maybe on something like this, if you rewrote it, I would put revise broker compensation agreement
Right,
right up here.
write it over again.
So if this was the original and you had to create a whole new document, this is a revised one, so you can have a tracking record. So the front document doesn't get in front of the other. So you're gonna have to identify. So, or, you know, if you want to cross it out initially.
But don't do it at the closing.
Don't make people have to figure it out later, piece together a bunch of things, like, that would be nice. As long as it's clear whether you're on the same page or on an addendum or
Right.
volume 2 or revised things.
An exchange of emails could be conceivable.
It could work, yeah, but
You gotta need to be very careful on that. Yeah, that's right. Exchange of emails would be, you acknowledge that you're paying the X. And the email comes back and says, yes, I agree, I'm paying, yes, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And you take those 2 emails that are like in a chain, and put them in your file.
Yeah, you know.
Agreement.
Initial.
Bill, are you still on the forms committee?
Not in Columbus,
In Columbus?
not Columbus.
Okay.
Statewide.
Statewide.
Statewide. You're part of that. That's like I say, that was the one missing, that I missed that meeting because they didn't invite me. It's maybe a good thing. But I know we're gonna talk about it next year in my hand department.
Any other questions?
Hey.
Don't get me
Your
started.
brain's going like this right now.
Mine always goes back to these listing, you better be a great listing agent.
Yes, I think that's what it really boils
You better
down
get great
to.
listing agent, or your price is gonna go like this if they don't offer compensation of some sort, whatever the buyer gets.
And if you do a really good job explaining to the seller, they're so like, it's all about education. They're
It
so, I mean, I was with Kathy on a barely $200,000 listing. And it's like, when you explain it to them, yeah, absolutely, I'm gonna give them 3%. I don't want it not, for the buyer side.
And if you say you're a seller, you're gonna be a buyer, do you wanna pay, are you okay paying my commission on the buyer's side? And they're gonna say to you, well, how will that impact me?
We've always had this.
Yeah.
I've got, when homes used to be $50,000.
Yeah.
And we have buyers buying these little $50,000 homes, I'd say, wait, by the way, I want to let you know, my minimum commission is $3,000. It's not $1,500, no, it's $3,000, so if you want to buy this home, I'm getting paid $3,000. So we've always had this, it's just now, it's become law. We now need to have that buyer's agreement. And how are we gonna be compensated?
We also never asked our client, how much do you wanna pay me? You told them what your commission.
Well,
was.
Teresa, if I'm gonna show this out to you, you're paying me
Right.
$3,000.
No, yeah,
And okay, here.
but we wrote it in the purchase contract too.
No, I mean, it would just go around something, I mean, I don't know if I had it on the purchase contract, but we put the deal together.
We had,
We got $3,000 at closing.
With respect to people's time, I got a question for you guys. So the market wise. You talked about before you left, people aren't gonna leave if they're not selling and they have 2% mortgages or whatever. That's a big factor, but I also hear on the grapevine and on national things that like. That's only gonna last for so long because people have to move. Like people. You can say, I don't wanna sell my house, but if taxes get too high, or
oh, yeah, those are.
the job, or they need to downsize for whatever reason, they need a smaller house, or they're moving the location.
That's the beauty of our business.
Is that factoring, you see that now that these people that have been holding out, now we're gonna sell, or not yet?
People, I've had clients that are wanna downsize, but they still have mortgages and if they're gonna have a $200,000 mortgage now or a $200,000 mortgage later, they'll keep their big house and never go upstairs.
So there's still.
It's hard, you can't overcome that, and that's fine. Hopefully they will when they can't do the steps anymore, or, but again, that's why you better be doing a good job to keep the rest of the client.
Our experience right now, residential, on the residential side of our houses, our business is all significantly. Okay, and that, we'd love to believe that's because we're better than everybody else. Maybe. More
You have
likely,
loyal
more likely it
relatives.
means that there are at least some sellers. That are breaking down and realizing that interest rates aren't going anywhere, right? And we need to move on.
And the taxes.
It's gotta be what's going on.
So is the market like softening a little bit, or no? It's still.
Depends where your business
Market.
That's where
There's more houses for us.
there's a lot more inventory now.
So it is better a little bit.
First time buyers are actually able to buy.
Whereas if
Yeah.
you're-
Without
Rarity, like,
Buy-
I've done a VA and then AJ. and I'm like,
But if they start paying more commissions, they may not be able to.
The first time I've had it there.
I mean, the other script that we should be talking about is for those people that are offering lower commission, right? That is talking directly to the people that are selling it, and the selling agent saying, hey, listen, I'm bringing together this offer. It's a highly qualified, but this is what we're gonna do. We are expecting a commission of, or a fee of the 3%. Here's your net. That's gonna be it. Is this acceptable to your client? Again, it's just,
It's all gonna
you're
be
extending an
very-
offer. It's like,
Right.
you're gonna extend a low ball offer to somebody, they can always say no.
That's right.
You know, so it's the quality of the offer that we're putting in there. Hey, we're gonna close this in less than 15 days. You don't
Right.
put lender,
Same thing.
it's done.
It's all about net to a seller, that's all they care about.
I'm gonna call you and say, what's important to your client? And that's gonna be part of that.
Ease.
I need to know your
Well,
sauce.
we've been doing that anyway when we're up against vulnerable offers. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's the same, but it's all.
And again, that's that question, like I said, you know, I know you're gonna have a lot of offers. What's the important things for your client? And that's a simple thing. I'm gonna give them every check mark off there. I did all that. Hey, by the way, we're doing this, we're gonna do this days, we're gonna have this, we'll do this, and it's concessions on both sides.
So how many times do you win the offer because you communicate? I've had clients, when I've sat down, I said, this agent is on it, I've never heard of this agent, they even sent
Yeah.
a pre-approval letter, it's the highest price, do you want the highest price?
Yeah,
If they say, yeah, I'll risk it, then it's, you go back to the seller, it's the same thing. So
So it's a relationship game. It's always been that way.
it is.
And AI and technology and texting has taken the relationship away from a lot of things. So this whole new concept of communicating with somebody is gonna really throw a wrench in a lot of people's bag, so. But we're old school.
We're way too old. Can't be tired.
And some of us like to
37 years.
chit chat.
Yeah, about that.
But thanks, guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
This is, yeah, kudos to you guys for having these kind of things and.
We're gonna have more masterminds, Dale and I think talking earlier in the week about having another mastermind next week. About this, so what are best practices? And we will probably have more ideas about scripts and maybe drop down menus. Or something that we could use as a guideline for contract writing. As well as communicating with your buyer, so. We'll announce it here. I'll talk to Dale here today to make sure that she reminds that we're gonna have a mastermind. It's July 1, it's next week, so July 1, we have to start using these, so we'll be having that conversation, I'm sure.
Well, I just wanna say thank you for
Yeah.
constantly trying to. Like, I
Alex,
feel like
you don't
our
know.
office is ahead of this,
Yeah.
compared to other offices. Thank
What's
you.
that now, Dave?
I'm gonna say thank you for
Oh.
constantly trying to get better and bring people in and teach and help going through this. And I think that's really valuable.
I think people have to be all the time about
Thank you.
the resume.
And remember, don't cut your worth down.
That's here to be education.
Yeah, it's a song.
So we are, it's clear, so I mean, our earnest money put into the spot.
Offering compensation.
I bet you don't know that standard.
Go back to-